Like everyone remembers where they were when JFK was shot or when 9/11 transpired, I will never forget the day I found out my dad had mesothelioma. The phone was ringing as I walked in the house from delivering a wedding cake. When I answered it, I heard my sister crying and asking me if I had seen my email from Mom. My mom was too upset to call us and tell us about Dad, so she sent us an email knowing that we check our accounts numerous times a day. In that moment, my life changed forever. I closed my catering business, and I left my husband and 2 young boys, and flew home to Canada as soon as I could to help take care of my father, because his dying wish was to stay home until the end. We had no idea how soon that would happen, but 2 months and 5 days after his diagnosis, my dad passed away. It was such a blessing he didn't suffer longer, as he was in excruciating pain, and it was almost as painful for us to watch a once vibrant, healthy man slip away. We invited Pat Davidson to attend the walk, but she had previous engagements. And so we asked for a statement, and she told us she would not do anything to embarrass her party. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Pat, but your party has not only embarrassed itself, it's embarrassed the entire nation of Canada. I wish some of the Tories would have the guts to speak out against their party, and they might find out that they have more support in the party. Now, Dr. Barry Castleman, an environmental consultant, was also unable to attend today. He's actually in Germany doing some asbestos court cases right now, and I asked if he would send a statement, and he obliged. Okay, quote, "I have been involved as a scientist and an activist in the global asbestos struggle for over 40 years. The multinational asbestos corporations were gone by the turn of the century. Now the industry consists of national companies in such places as India and Mexico. I call them the local chapters of the asbestos mafia. They use the propaganda developed by Canadian asbestos industry and the Canadian government all over the world. They often develop corrupt financial ties to politicians, government officials, academics, and the media in order to avoid paying the high cost of prevention and compensation. Their profit margin is based on externalizing these costs to the workers and society at large. These companies are in many cases owned by the people who got in when the multinational companies got out in the 1990s. These ruthless companies threaten doctors, unionists, and others who dare to criticize them. These then are the commercial customers for Canada's asbestos exports today. And it would be funny if it were not so deadly serious to see Harper and Premier Charest talking about controlled use of asbestos in India, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Anyone who says there is controlled use of asbestos in the developing world is either a liar or a fool. Over the past several years, a social movement has emerged across Canada wherein public health workers, doctors, unionists, and others have publicly denounced the Canadian government's leading role in continuing to legitimize the asbestos trade. The Canadian media have awakened to the issue and now give it prominence. And only now are we starting to hear from the most compelling voices of all, the victims of the Canadian asbestos industry's toxic corporate crimes. These victims have the most powerful stories of all, and they may yet do what everyone and everything else has failed to do: get Canada out of the asbestos business. I wish you well in your exercise of citizenship. Canadian politicians should not behave like bribed flunkies of unnamed predators of the global asbestos mafia. If the mines close in Quebec, there will be approximately 300 people out of work. Why not take the $58 million that the Quebec government has promised Baljeet Chadha, the owner of who exports this death to his home country of India and retrain their employees or give them severance packages, or bring a new industry to town, one that doesn't kill people.
Tourism.
Yeah. Baljeet has told the world that there is a high-powered anti-asbestos organization that is trying to take him down. I'm impressed that Baljeet thinks that we are a huge organization. We are just housewives, widows, widowers, and children of victims from across the country fed up with his criminal acts. Baljeet has to raise $25 million in order to qualify for the $58 million from the government to open the mines again. He tried to do this by his deadline in July, and he failed, so he asked for an extension. He failed again on August 15th and asked for another extension. And ironically, the deadline is today. We need to be the voices of our family members. I know they don't want others to suffer as they have. Together, we can stop this crime against humanity. We need to ban asbestos now.
It's been 3 weeks since the anniversary of 9/11, a day that changed the world. 3 weeks ago, Canada honored the 24 Canadians that were killed in that terrible act of terrorism. For 10 years, our soldiers fought a war based on that despicable act and the lives lost that day. The people that died in the Twin Towers did not deserve to die. They were just showing up for work, innocent and oblivious to the plans that were about to unfold. Can you imagine if afterwards, instead of going to war, the Canadian government instead traveled to the terrorist training camps, offering millions in taxpayer dollars to expand their operations and pledging their unyielding support? How would victims' families feel? And how should Canadians feel in the face of such betrayal? There are two main differences between this scenario and what is happening today to the victims of asbestos. Number one, the perpetrators of these workplace deaths are not in some far-off land. They are in Canada. Number two, they haven't killed 24 Canadians, they've killed thousands. In 2007, the most recent year we have statistics for, there were 512 Canadians killed, and that's happening year after year. Asbestos is Canada's #1 occupational killer, and unlike some unpredictable accidents at work, these deaths were completely preventable. And yet the governments of Quebec and Canada, with support from Conservatives from sea to sea, are propping up this organization, knowing that it causes death to increase its power, similar in nature to the terrorists who crashed their planes, but with greed as their ideology. This is a betrayal of the thousands of families who have been affected by asbestos. Like the innocent workers who just showed up to work at the Twin Towers, our family members showed up for work, never knowing until it was far too late what the asbestos industry had covered up for decades. To the families of asbestos victims, Canadian politicians are simply funding the terrorists who killed our family. If we fund the Conservative Party while they support asbestos, we too are contributing. In 2008, I watched my father's 2-month battle with mesothelioma. After the initial biopsy, his voice became a raspy whisper. They drained enough bloody fluid from his lungs to fill a large pop bottle. He went on oxygen to make up for the lack of lung capacity he had as his lungs filled up with tumor and liquid. He was constantly thirsty. The painkillers took the edge off his pain, but he was still in agony and would cringe as we even adjusted his light bed sheet. We watched him breathe and stop breathing, breathe and stop breathing, wondering which breath would be his last. Reluctant to say goodbye, but praying he would soon be at peace. And this is the story of so many of you in this community and across Canada. And this is the legacy that Canada is inflicting upon the developing world for decades to come. Only they won't be able to afford the medicine that we have here in Canada. Even if Canada stops exporting asbestos tomorrow, the disease and death will continue for decades. For future generations, we must stop now. Please fill out a postcard, sign the petitions, write letters to local and national newspapers, and stop funding the party that supports asbestos exports. We are the voices of asbestos victims, and we will not be silent until asbestos is banned.